What if you were alone in the mountains, surrounded only by silence, cold, and the feeling that every step might be your last? What would you do if your only hope of survival came from a complete stranger, from a world far removed from your own? This is the question that opens the door to one of the most moving stories of the Old West, a tale of courage, compassion, and encounters that change destinies. Today, you'll learn about the journey of Ethan Miller, an ordinary cowboy accustomed to working cattle and the solitude of the Great Plains, but who, on a seemingly simple journey, ended up facing the greatest ordeal of his life. The Wild West has always been the stage for grand adventures, legends of fearless cowboys, and conflicts that marked generations. But behind the duels and dusty roads lay human stories, full of emotion and difficult choices. And Ethan's is one of those stories. Imagine riding through mountain trails, believing you know the way well, and suddenly realizing you're completely lost. Fog obscures every direction, the cold bites your skin, and hunger begins to take its toll on your recklessness. Have you ever experienced this? The feeling of having no way out, with no one around to offer help? Ethan Miller believed he was strong enough to face any challenge. After all, the life of a cowboy always required endurance, bravery, and a good dose of luck. But that day, luck seemed to have been left behind. As time passed, his hope waned, and all that remained was the will to take one more step, even without knowing if there would be another after. It was at this moment, at the height of his vulnerability, that Takoda appeared, a mysterious native with silent steps and a steady gaze, as if he were part of the mountain itself. What you're about to discover may surprise you. Takoda wasn't just a man of the wilds, but someone who carried with him knowledge of nature, ancestral wisdom, and a courage that went beyond survival instinct. Ethan, initially suspicious, found himself faced with the most difficult choice: trust his life to a stranger or continue lost in the unknown. In the Old West, where encounters between cowboys and natives were often marked by conflict and mistrust, this moment represented more than a simple chance for rescue. It was a meeting of worlds. Stay with me until the end, because every detail of this journey reveals more than just an adventure. It shows how life can be transformed when we decide to accept the outstretched hand of those we least expect. Ethan had no idea that his survival would depend not only on Takoda's courage, but also on a high price, a price that would forever change the way he viewed life, trust, and the true meaning of solidarity. Deep in the mountains, cowboy and native would walk side by side, braving the cold, hunger, and dangers hidden around every bend in the trail. But the rescue, which seemed like a simple act of compassion, would soon reveal itself to be much deeper, fraught with consequences that went beyond the simple idea of survival. Ethan Miller would learn that sometimes fate crosses our paths unexpectedly, and that unlikely encounters can leave lasting marks. And it is exactly at this point that our story begins to gain momentum. Ultimately, stories like Ethan and Takoda's aren't just about the Wild West. They're about all of us, about the times we feel lost, directionless, and how an unexpected gesture can change the course of our lives. Maybe you've been in a situation like this, where someone reached out at just the right moment, or perhaps you were the one who offered help when least expected. I'd love for you to share this in the comments, because every story, every opinion, enriches this community and transforms this space into something greater than just a storytelling channel. It becomes a place for exchange and mutual learning. Your voice makes a difference here, and if this content has touched you in any way, if it brought back a memory or sparked reflection, please leave a like. It may seem like a simple gesture, but it shows that it's worth continuing to bring you moving stories from the Old West. Stories that speak of courage, humanity, and encounters that change destinies. Your support is the fuel that keeps this project going. And of course, if you want to continue following narratives like this, subscribe to the channel. This way, you'll ensure you don't miss the next stories to come. Your participation is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content, spreading messages of hope and humanity amidst so many voices. And while you're on this journey with us, Ethan and Takoda's story continues. The Wild West wasn't just a backdrop for movies and legends, but a stark reality, marked by the solitude of the plains, the harsh climate, and the constant sense that danger lurked around every bend in the road. Imagine miles and miles of wilderness, with no nearby towns, just narrow, trails, icy rivers, and seemingly endless mountains. The cowboy who ventured these paths needed more than physical strength. He needed a mindset forged in silence, patience, and the courage to face the unknown. It was a world where every decision could determine survival or ruin. The nights were long and dark, illuminated only by the stars, which seemed like silent observers of the stories unfolding below. The biting cold seeped into the bones, and often a makeshift fire was the only companion. For a lone traveler, the feeling of being isolated, far from any sign of civilization, could shake even the most resilient. It was in these moments that the hidden truth of that territory revealed itself. There was no room for pride or overconfidence. Nature reminded day after day who truly held the upper hand. And yet at the same time, there was something profoundly transformative about this lifestyle. Cowboys lived a journey marked by constant risk, but also by a freedom few had ever known. There were no rules other than those imposed by the land itself. This freedom, however, came at a high price: loneliness, uncertainty, silent battles against oneself. The psychological impact was as great as the physical, and it was precisely in this mixture of despair and hope that stories like Ethan Miller's emerged. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because by understanding the environment in which these men lived, we can grasp the true dimension of what it meant to be lost in the mountains. It wasn't just being off course, it was facing the possibility that each wrong step could be your last. The mindset needed to move forward required clarity, discipline, and an inner strength not everyone possessed. And when fear threatened to overwhelm, instinct was often the only compass. The behind-the-scenes story of this Wild West life shows that self-confidence could be a powerful weapon, but also a deadly trap. Many believed they were invincible, that they knew every trail, every sign of nature, but the truth was harsh. A sudden fog, an unexpected storm, or treacherous terrain were enough to push even the most experienced to the brink. And it is precisely at this point that Ethan's story gains intensity. He wasn't a legendary hero or someone seeking glory. He was an ordinary man imbued with the courage typical of cowboys and the need to fulfill his mission. But when he found himself lost, he felt the weight of decisions that had previously seemed simple. The silence of the night turned into a threat. The wind became an invisible enemy, and every shadow among the trees reminded him of his vulnerability. It was at that moment that arrogance gave way to humility, and certainty gave way to reflection. This is the true impact of the Wild West, showing that life didn't forgive mistakes, but offered in return profound lessons about humanity, trust, and limits. And in the midst of this harsh reality, Takoda appears, bringing with him not only knowledge of the land, but also a new perspective. Their encounter wasn't just a clash of different cultures, it was a revelation that, in times of extreme need, compassion can cross any barrier. Ethan Miller wasn't known for grandiose achievements or for having his name plastered across Western newspapers. He was in essence the epitome of the common cowboy, one who built his life day after day, from sunrise to sunset, tending cattle, weathering dust storms, and carrying with him only the hope of better days. His figure resembled a simple man, but one with a quiet strength that impressed those who observed him closely. He had no fortune, nor ambitions for glory. What drove Ethan was his responsibility to the land, to the animals, and to the idea that deep down each journey had the power to shape a man's soul. He woke early, always before sunrise, because he knew the routine required discipline. His coffee was strong, his hat was worn by time, his boots marked by miles of trail. Every detail of his life reflected the hardship of someone who learned that nothing comes easy. But there was also a calmness in his gaze, a kind of silent wisdom that only those who had braved the backwoods of the West could carry. The hidden truth behind that life was that every decision mattered. A small mistake in cattle management, a poorly thought-out choice about which trail to follow, and all the effort of weeks could be lost. Ethan carried this awareness with every step. It was with this mindset that he decided to climb the mountains. At first, it seemed like just another task among many, to scout a promising area for new pastures and perhaps to gather supplies that were in short supply. The journey was unremarkable, at least at first. But what few realized was that the Wild West always held unexpected revelations. A simple route could turn into a path of no return, and the mountains, with their imposing silence, had the power to test even the strongest. Ethan wasn't seeking adventure, but he knew that every journey posed risks. His courage came not from heroic acts, but from perseverance, from holding firm when others gave up. He understood that the impact of each choice shaped not only the present, but the future of his entire small community. Caring for the land and ensuring food for those who depended on him was the reason behind that journey. It was this that gave him the strength to face the loneliness of the path and the uncertainty of the unknown. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because when we look at Ethan, we realize that his story isn't just about a cowboy lost on a mountain. It's about the transformation that happens when we're pushed to the limit. He believed his experience was enough, that the passage of years had given him mastery over nature. But the hidden truth is that nature always has ways of surprising us and often overturns the most solid certainties. This contrast between trust and vulnerability is what makes his journey so remarkable. There's something powerful in observing how simple men, driven by equally simple purposes, carry within themselves the greatness hidden in small actions. Ethan had no idea of the impact that trip would have, nor of the encounter that would change his perception of trust, friendship, and sacrifice. He set out believing he was merely fulfilling another duty, but fate had already mapped out a different path, one that would reveal the behind-the-scenes nature of a reality, much greater than he could have imagined. And that's the beauty of Wild West stories. They reveal how life, at its harshest, is also the greatest teacher. The cowboy who sets out on a routine mission may end up discovering truths that transform not only his way of surviving, but also his way of seeing the world. That's exactly what happened to Ethan Miller. Mountains have always held a beauty that enchants, but also an unforgiving face that exacts a heavy toll on those who dare challenge them. Ethan Miller knew this, but still believed his experience would be enough to guide him safely. What he didn't count on was that, on that trip, the fog would suddenly appear, covering familiar trails as if to erase them from memory. The path that had seemed clear at first now transformed into a maze of uncertainty. Every step carried the weight of doubt, and the silence of the surroundings only heightened the feeling of being alone before a hidden truth. Nature does not allow itself to be dominated so easily. As he advanced, Ethan felt his body grow weary. The cold wind slashed against his face, sharp as invisible blades, and the dampness permeating his clothes increased the feeling of heaviness. Night was falling early, and the darkness of the mountains seemed to swallow any hope of finding his way back. Imagine being alone, not knowing if he would ever see the dawn again. This was the reality he faced, and every beat of his heart echoed as a reminder of the constant danger. Hunger began to set in. Supplies, already scarce, were consumed faster than planned. Water was also scarce, and an empty stomach turned even the slightest effort into a grueling battle. Ethan, accustomed to tough journeys, realized that this time it wasn't just about physical endurance, but also mentality. His mind needed to stay strong, even when his body begged him to give up. The impact of this internal struggle was as strong as the loneliness itself. It was as if every shadow around him questioned his ability to continue. The hidden truth of those mountains began to reveal itself. Strength or courage were not enough. Humility was required. The pride that had always accompanied him was dismantled with each misdirection, each sleepless night. And what had once been confidence turned to uncertainty. Memories of home, the warmth of the hearth, the simple companionship of ordinary days came to mind as a cruel contrast to the cold, silent reality that surrounded him. Ethan's transformation was underway, even without him realizing it. The journey was no longer just about finding a physical path and was beginning to become an inner search. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what was at stake wasn't just survival. It was the revelation of limits, the discovery that wrong decisions can be costly, and that often there are no second chances. The behind the scenes of this struggle showed a man confronting himself, forced to face fears he had never admitted. The cold wasn't just climatic, it was also emotional. Loneliness wasn't just the absence of people, it was the constant presence of thoughts that challenged his courage. The nights were the worst. The absolute silence made every snap of a twig sound like a threat. His body trembled not only from the cold, but from the anxiety of not knowing if the next morning would come. And yet, there was something that kept him going, the hope, however fragile, of finding a way out. This thread of hope is what separates those who give up from those who keep going, even when everything seems to be against them. And Ethan chose to keep going, even though every step was a reminder of his vulnerability. What makes this part of the journey so powerful is precisely the contrast between the image of a confident cowboy and the reality of a lost man, stripped of certainty, confronted with his own fragility. This contrast is what generates transformation, because it is at the limit that revelations happen. And Ethan was about to discover this in a painful but also unforgettable way. Just when Ethan believed there was no way out, when the cold seemed to win out and hope was fading like a dying fire, something unexpected happened. From the silent woods, the figure of a man emerged. There was no sound of heavy footsteps, no sign of a sudden approach. It was as if he had sprung from the mountain itself, silent, integrated into the landscape, almost invisible. His name was Takoda, and his presence seemed to carry the ancient strength of the land, as if the secrets of the trails and the winds were hidden within his eyes. For Ethan, his first reaction was distrust. He knew the stories, the clashes between cowboys and natives, the territorial disputes and the prejudices fueled by years of misunderstandings. His weary mind, already weakened by cold and hunger, couldn't clearly distinguish whether this encounter was a chance for salvation or the harbinger of a new danger. But there was something about Takoda that caught his attention. His calm posture, his steady gaze, and especially the way he seemed to fear nothing around him. He was there, standing, part of the scenery, but also a stark contrast to the despair that consumed Ethan. Takoda didn't say much, at least not with words. His silence conveyed more than words could. The simple gesture of extending his hand, offering some water, was enough to break the initial barrier. Ethan hesitated, but instinct prevailed. He accepted the help, even though he harbored doubts about the cost of such a decision. And it is at this point that the story gains momentum, because the encounter between the two was not merely physical. It was a clash of worlds, cultures, and mindsets. While Ethan carried the burden of the cowboy's practical logic, advance, resist, master the land, Takoda saw nature differently. For him, every rock, every tree, every current of air was part of a sacred balance. It was this perception that gave him the ability to move through the mountains as naturally as a fish swims in a river. Ethan saw obstacles where Takoda saw paths. This difference created tension, but also aroused awe. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this encounter symbolizes something greater than just a rescue. It's about transformation, about how in moments of vulnerability, we're forced to acknowledge that we don't have all the answers. Ethan learned behind the scenes of his journey that trusting is as courageous a decision as resisting. He needed to let go of his pride and allow himself to be guided. And Takoda, in turn, knew that this act of compassion could have an impact far beyond that moment, because by saving a man, he also planted the seed of a new vision of respect and humanity. The contrast between the two was evident. On one side, a cowboy accustomed to solitude and the constant struggle against the land. On the other, a native who understood the mountain as an ally, not an enemy. This duality became the key to Ethan's survival. What seemed unlikely, two different worlds walking together, became the only way forward. And, on this journey, the silence shared between them said more than long conversations could express. Ethan could hardly believe what he was experiencing. After days of utter despair, Takoda's every gesture seemed almost unreal, as if a gift from the mountain itself. The native moved with impressive precision, as if he knew every rock, every curve of the terrain, every whisper of the wind. For Ethan, following in his footsteps was the only option, but also a challenge, because every meter he advanced seemed to demand more than his strength could handle. Takoda not only led him through the mountain's secret paths, he taught him to observe signs the cowboy would never have noticed. Markings on the ground, changes in wind direction, the distant song of birds, all served as guides for those who knew how to interpret nature's hidden secrets. In his weakest moments, when Ethan felt his body give out, Takoda would offer him a piece of dried meat or a sip of water, sharing what little he had. This wasn't just food. It was also a reminder that survival was possible, as long as there was sharing. The hidden truth of the situation was clear. The cowboy, accustomed to independence, had to accept the vulnerability of depending on another man. This change of mindset wasn't simple, but it was necessary. Every decision to follow Takoda required trust, and that trust grew stronger with each gesture of solidarity. The nights were especially harsh. The cold seemed to penetrate to the bone, and the wind punished mercilessly. It was then that Takoda showed Ethan techniques for resistance. Using dry branches and stones, he improvised shelters that cut off the draft, and with furs he carried with him, he taught him how to retain heat. These were simple solutions, but they had a profound impact, transforming the fear of the night into a chance. For rest, however brief, Ethan observed carefully, trying to record every detail, as if he were facing precious revelations that could mean the difference between life and death. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what was happening wasn't just a physical rescue. It was also a journey of inner transformation. Ethan, who had always believed his strength came from solitary endurance, began to realize there was something greater in the idea of walking together. Takoda didn't say much, but his gestures were silent lessons. He demonstrated that survival lay not in dominating nature, but in respecting it, in learning from it. This contrast in mindsets further heightened the tension between the two worlds, but also created an invisible bond, an understanding that transcended words. Still, nothing came easily. The mountain tested their resolve with every step. Slippery trails, sudden landslides, the roar of lurking animals. Each ordeal seemed to shatter what little hope remained. And it was precisely in this hostile environment that the partnership between the two solidified. Ethan, weakened, found in Takoda not only a guide, but a living example of resilience. Takoda, in carrying this man he barely knew, demonstrated a compassion that went beyond instinct. It was a conscious choice, a decision to risk oneself for another. This part of the journey exposes something we often forget. The greatest lessons emerge when we are forced to deal with uncertainty. It was at the limit of exhaustion, in the most intense cold, with hunger that ran like fire in the stomach, that Ethan began to see beyond the obvious. With each night he survived, there was an implicit revelation. Life always demands sacrifice, but also rewards those who persist. And deep down, Takoda's presence represented not only a momentary salvation, but proof that trusting in the unexpected can open paths previously unseen. The secret trails Takoda knew seemed to open new opportunities for survival, but the mountain never failed to remind him who truly held the power. It was on one of these steep stretches, when the path narrowed among loose rocks and the sound of the wind turned into a constant roar, that the unexpected happened. A section of the slope began to give way, first with small rocks rolling, then with a landslide that threatened to swallow everything. Ethan, already weakened and with heavy steps, had no time to react. Had he been alone, that would have been the end of his journey. But Takoda, in a quick reflex, lunged to push him out of the way of the collapse. The impact was brutal. The dust kicked up by the falling rocks made the air thick, difficult to breathe. When everything calmed down, Ethan realized he was alive, but Takoda had suffered the consequences. Some of his belongings had been buried, and among them something of great value, a sacred artifact of his tribe, carried not only as an object, but as a symbol of identity and spiritual connection. The loss was irreparable. That day, Takoda gave more than help. He gave part of himself to save a stranger. This moment brought to light the hidden truth of rescue. There was no help without sacrifice. Ethan realized with profound shock that his survival had come at a high price. The cowboy, accustomed to measuring value in cattle, land, and supplies, now understood that there were assets that could not be replaced. The impact of this gesture shook him in a way that words could not convey. It was more than gratitude. It was an acknowledgement that Takoda had put his story, his memory, and even his faith on the line for someone who, until recently, had been a stranger. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because what was at stake wasn't just the mountain crossing. It was Ethan's silent transformation in the face of Takoda's sacrifice. When someone gives up something so valuable for the sake of another's life, an invisible bond is created. This bond isn't based on words or promises, but on choices, and choices like these have the power to forever mark the journey of those who witness them. Behind the scenes of that scene, there were revelations that went beyond the physical rescue. Ethan realized that true help is never free, not in the sense of charging, but in the sense of giving. Those who help always give up something: time, energy, safety, comfort, sometimes even dreams. And Dakota had given up a piece of his own soul. This cultural and human shock showed the Cowboy that the world was much bigger than his own needs. Ethan's mindset began to shift there. He understood that life isn't measured solely by individual achievements, but also by the impact we have on each other. Dakota risked his own life and lost an irreplaceable possession, but he didn't hesitate. This kind of decision isn't born of calculation, but of conviction. The revelation was clear. Courage isn't just about facing danger, it's also about choosing to bear the weight of loss for the sake of someone in need. Ethan would never forget the scene. Dakota's gaze, firm and serene even in the face of loss, carried a silent strength that taught more than any speech. It was as if he was saying without words that the value of life is above any object, no matter how sacred. That was the moment Ethan realized his own journey would never be the same. Ethan walked in silence, feeling the weight of what had happened. Each step felt lighter for being alive, but also heavier for knowing what Dakota had sacrificed. The image of the crumbling rocks, of the native's steady, serene gaze, wouldn't leave his mind. It was as if a new awareness had taken hold within him. For the first time, the cowboy wasn't thinking only of himself, his cattle, and his survival. He was thinking of others, and this simple detail marked the beginning of a profound transformation. At first, when Dakota had appeared, Ethan had let fear and prejudice guide his reaction. Distrust was almost instinctive, born of long-standing history of disputes and misunderstandings. But now, after the sacrifice he had witnessed, that vision seemed small, almost shameful. He felt the need to rethink his thinking, to admit that he had misjudged, and that he was standing before someone whose courage and compassion went far beyond any label. The gratitude welling up in his heart was unlike anything he'd ever felt. It wasn't just a common thank you. It was a silent, profound acknowledgement that Dakota had changed the course of his life. Ethan understood that true gratitude isn't just about feeling relieved by the help received, but also about realizing the transformative impact this gesture has on our worldview. The cowboy, who had always prided himself on his independence, now understood that life gains more meaning when someone chooses to be by our side, even without any obligation. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this internal change is what truly gives value to the entire journey. The hidden truth is that we often carry invisible barriers, prejudices that prevent us from seeing others as they truly are. Ethan had this barrier within himself, built over the years by stories repeated ad nauseum. But the moment Dakota risked everything to save him, those walls began to crumble. What emerged there wasn't just respect, it was genuine admiration, a recognition that without that unexpected presence, he wouldn't be alive to reflect on any of this. This revelation also brought a sense of humility. Ethan realized that no matter how skilled he was, no matter how experienced he was, there would always be times when he needed to trust someone. And trusting is a decision that requires courage. Behind the scenes in life, trust is what separates suffocating loneliness from true human connection. Dakota demonstrated this not with speeches, but with actions. The impact of this gesture was impossible to ignore. Ethan, previously trapped in his own logic of survival, now saw that compassion was also a form of strength, a different, silent force, but capable of crossing cultural boundaries and transforming a stranger into someone indispensable. And this new perspective opened within him a clearing of understanding. Respect isn't born of fear or imposition, but of mutual recognition. He respected Dakota not because he had to, but because he had learned in practice that true greatness lies in those who give more than they receive. This journey of gratitude had just begun, but it had already left a deep mark. Ethan knew that from then on nothing would be the same. The experience of walking alongside Dakota, of relying on his wisdom, of witnessing his selflessness, had redefined his concept of human worth. And this transformation would be impossible to erase. As Ethan absorbed everything that had happened, clarity came like a slow, inevitable wave. He understood that their encounter in the mountains was not just a coincidence, but a profound reminder that life has its own paths to teach. Sometimes fate crosses unlikely paths to remind us of the value of solidarity. Ethan, who had so often believed he could face everything alone, now realized that true courage lay not just in enduring the cold or defying the dangers of nature, but in accepting the outstretched hand of someone he never imagined he could trust. This kind of experience has the power to break down walls that for a long time seemed unbreakable. Cultural differences, histories of rivalry, and the prejudices that separated cowboys and natives seemed small compared to the grandeur of a gesture of compassion. The hidden truth is that human beings, regardless of where they come from or what they carry within, can be bridges rather than barriers. Takoda demonstrated this in practice with an attitude that required no words, only action. And Ethan, upon receiving this gift, learned that respect and humanity are universal values, which speak louder than any division created by man. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this revelation doesn't just belong to the past or a Wild West story. It speaks to decisions we still need to make today. How often do we look at others and see only their differences, when in reality, the impact of one act of generosity could change everything? The mindset Ethan adopted after that journey was the result of pain, sacrifice, and transformation. He discovered that true courage isn't limited to physical strength or the stubbornness to keep going, but is revealed in the recognition that we need each other. Behind the scenes of life, solidarity is the invisible thread that holds everything together. The cowboy and the native, who once represented distant worlds, became proof that humanity and compassion transcend borders. The impact of this encounter wasn't limited to the mountains, but resonated within Ethan as a revelation. No matter the origin, language, or symbols of each culture, what defines someone's greatness is their ability to see in others a reflection of themselves. This is a lesson that never fades. Ethan understood that Takoda not only saved his life, but also showed him that fate can place us in situations that challenge our prejudices to make room for something greater. Takoda's gesture was a call to transformation, and Ethan responded by embracing the shift in his own vision. And it is at this point that the story connects with all of us, because each of us, at some point, will be tested by the choice between selfishness and solidarity, between distrust and trust, between fear and courage. The most curious thing is realizing how these seemingly small choices can yield immense revelations. Ethan, a simple cowboy in search of pasture, never imagined he would find such a powerful lesson about humanity in the heart of the mountain. This shows us that life, in its unpredictability, is also a tireless teacher, always ready to surprise us when we least expect it. And so, Ethan. Miller's story took on new meaning. He wasn't just a cowboy who survived the mountains, but a man who would forever bear the mark of an unlikely encounter. Takoda's sacrifice didn't just spare him from death, it was also an invitation to see life through new eyes, to realize that courage and compassion have greater power than any weapon or skill a cowboy could carry in the saddle. Ethan survived, but more than that, he was reborn in his understanding of the world. In the Old West, where so many stories are told with gunfire, disputes, and land conquests, this one stands out because it reveals a hidden truth that often goes unnoticed. It's not just victories in duels or accumulated riches that define destinies, but rather human gestures, silent and profound. It was Takoda, with his decision to risk everything for a stranger, who showed Ethan that greatness lies not in dominating nature, but in walking in harmony with it. This contrast between two such different worlds had a lasting impact, revealing that even in difficult times there was room for solidarity. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because if we look closely, every detail of this journey speaks to us of transformation. Ethan set off for the mountains believing it was just another task in his routine, but returned bearing revelations that changed his mindset forever. He understood that trust isn't born solely from prolonged coexistence, but can arise in an instant when someone proves the value of their soul with actions. This realization made him a more attentive, humble man, and more willing to see others beyond appearances. The behind-the-scenes story of this encounter reminds us of something essential. No matter where we come from, There will always be moments when our lives intersect with unexpected people, and these people may hold within them the answers we can't find alone. Takoda's decision to help, even knowing the price he would have to pay, was an act of quiet courage, but it changed not only Ethan's life, but also the way we, upon hearing this story, reflect on our own choices. This narrative teaches us that every gesture carries weight. Sometimes we underestimate the importance of a simple action, of a sacrifice that seems small, but whose impact resonates long afterward. Ethan learned this when he saw Takoda give up something sacred to save him. And we can learn from this example that often true power lies in choosing to give, even when it requires sacrifice. The Old West may seem distant, a landscape lost in time, but stories like this span generations because they speak of what is essential: courage, compassion, and solidarity. These values don't age. They don't change with the ages. They simply present themselves in new contexts, always ready to remind us that deep down, what unites destinies is not brute force, but shared humanity. If you've made it this far, I imagine this story touched you in some way. That's why I want to ask you something simple. Like this video, because that way I know this kind of content resonates with you, and it motivates me to continue bringing you stories that carry emotion, transformation, and those hidden truths that only emerge when we delve deeper. Also, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, because that way you guarantee you'll be with me on every new journey I share here. Your presence makes all the difference, and it's what keeps the connection we've created throughout the video alive. And if you followed until the end, write in the comments, "I'm with you until the end." I will know that you were part of this entire journey with me, and I will love to see who really stayed until the last detail of this narrative. Now, if this story has already touched you, there's another one right here that will also move you. Click and stay with me there.